tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So again, there's not a specific early Buddhist Pali Sanskrit word that specifically would be a translation for the word emotion. Our Western category of emotion is complex and not, there are some technical definitions in the psychology world, in the psychiatric world, in the neuroscience world, but colloquially, often what we mean is a kind of bodily but affective energy that is not the same as story or narrative or cognition. So in our kind of Western approach, we separate into categories things that we call thoughts and things that we call emotions. In the Buddhist system, they're not separated that way. Instead, the primary separation is between things that are good for us and things that are not good for us. So the lists that contain things that we would call emotions maybe are more easily thought of as lists of states or qualities. And these lists include some things that we would think of more in the kind of bodily energy realm, some things that we would consider, that we would think of in the kind of affective or emotional realm. Those are not exactly the same, but I'll lump them together for now. And some things that we would think of in the cognitive or mental realm. Right? So if you think of a list like the list of the 5 hindrances, right? The first two, grasping at sense pleasures and hatred and ill will, they are emotions of a sort, right? Grasping, wanting is a kind of an emotion. It's one of those emotions that comes with a strong bodily energy. Often you can feel wanting just in the body, right? And sometimes there's even a wanting and there's not even a thought of what you want, right? There can just be the sense of wanting, especially when the wanting is like an aversion to an unpleasant experience like boredom. So there can be a wanting, but not even an object of the wanting. I just want something interesting to happen or arise. I want to feel different than this. So, but the wanting as the first hindrance, right? These are hindrances to concentration, hindrances to settling in meditation, hindrances to peace or ease or tranquility. This first wanting is specifically the grasping at sensual pleasures. So wanting something to happen through any of my senses that's pleasurable. And the second is hatred and ill will. So this is a very particular, focused, hot kind of aversion. And it's not the same as anger. So anger is not listed here as a hindrance. This is really the kind of ill will that that seeks to destroy or very strongly push away. And I think that's we can feel that as different from the common, the sort of more colloquial way we use the word anger. That doesn't always have a kind of push or an object in it. Right? There's different kinds of anger. What's really here in the second hindrance is hatred and ill will. So you can feel those, the emotional punch of those states, both the grasping and the hatred. The third and fourth hindrances are interesting, right? One of them is sloth and torpor. Sloth is the old Victorian word for laziness, and torpor is more the bodily or bodily energetic dullness. So, torpor has more of just a bodily energy quality. I can be actually relatively content, right? I can have some pleasant Vedana, but kind of torpor, like I'm really sleepy or just dull. Um, so would I call that an emotion? For me, it's more of a bodily energy. But sloth, that the impulse to pull away from effort, let's say, laziness, it's difficult to arouse my energy to engage. It has more of an emotional quality, right? It has some of the same physical qualities as torpor, but it also has a kind of emotional push. And, right, laziness or sloth, that kind of thing, resistance, often often can really have a story behind it. So it can have a kind of mental, cognitive, psychological level. If I was therapeutically investigating, trying to really understand my sloth, which I have done, because I have some for sure, a fair amount, I get in there and I feel this or that aspect of my attachment system, or the way that I disengage, or the way that my nervous system goes into freeze, right? There's these ways that this thing I could call an emotion has cognitive aspects, bodily aspects. I think for so many of our emotions, this is what we'll find, is we'll find a mix of a kind of bodily energy and then a story or a narrative, something cognitive that goes along with it, that both explains it and names it and gives it a kind of shape or identity or direction, but also then feeds it, right? As we were talking about, you have a sensation, I'm upset in some way, but then I tell the story of why I'm upset and I get more upset. So there can be a feedback loop between the bodily energy and the story or the narrative that explains it. So there's sloth and torpor, a mixture of bodily and cognitive. And then its twin, restlessness and worry. And and again, the worry can have a more cognitive tone, right? Worry, anxiety, really spinning in thought about something. It's an emotion for sure, but it has this, its characteristic symptom is mental. Um, but then restlessness, can be both mental, but in the sense of like, I can't sit still. Where sitting still is metaphorical sitting still, like I'm not content. But there can also really be this bodily, like it's just hard to settle the body. It's twitchy, there's impulse. So again, a mixture of mental and bodily. And then the fifth hindrance of skeptical doubt, um, uh, you know, kind of the sort of quintessential narrative or cognitive hindrance, right? Doubt is almost always um, kind of described in terms of a story, right? The story of I can't, or it's not good enough, or I'm not good enough, or some version of I can't, or it won't, or it's not. That's something like that. And so it's helpful to see, doubt um, having this strong cognitive aspect. But if I said to you, is doubt an emotion? I imagine you would say yes, right? Doubt is not just a storyline, but there's also a kind of energy that goes with it. And one of the things that can be most helpful when we are bringing our mindfulness to emotions and feelings is to tease apart the complex network of qualities that comes together and to become a thing that we call something like doubt. When we say I'm having doubt, uh, what does that mean? What is happening? So okay, I'm running some thoughts of unworthiness or something. But along with those thoughts, there's going to be, and this is going to be always helpful to bring our attention to, there's always going to be a bodily energetic component. So what's happening in the body? And almost always, almost always really, I want to say always, I'll say almost, when there's an unpleasant or painful mental quality, it's so likely that you're going to find an unpleasant or uncomfortable bodily experience. And so doubt arises, say, oh, there's doubt, I'm doubting. One thing I really want to do is bring attention to the body and say, okay, what does the doubting body feel like? Or You could ask the question in a kind of somatic sort of way. Where in my body does the doubt live? Where do I notice it? Because a thought or a story, we go like this, as if it lives in the head. It doesn't. Maybe it sort of does in the way that the brain works, but we don't sense inside the brain. What we see is we see inner images, we hear sounds, we talk to ourselves, and the whole nervous system thinks. So all through the body, there's cognitive activity, right? When we say, I heard this news and it was like a gut punch, that's not just a metaphor. It's actually how it feels, you know. So I could say, oh, where's doubt in the body? And tune in, and I might find, like a heaviness, like a rock at the center of the chest, or a weight or a kind of hollowness in the belly, or a wobbliness, I'm sort of unstable in some part of my vestibular system. My sense of being balanced and grounded can be wonked. So when we say, become mindful of an emotion, often what we mean is notice when there's a strong energy present that comes along with a narrative. And particularly we're interested in the ones that are compelling enough that they're going to pull us away from tranquility, from settling, but also from seeing clearly. And when a strong emotion comes, what we need to do if we want to be free in relation to it is to really understand it clearly. We want to come to an intimacy with it. This can feel in practice somewhat different from other ways of relating to emotion that we may have learned in other modalities or other parts of our culture, including some parts of our culture that understand emotions almost um, like pressures that build up inside one that need to be expressed, right? You see this in um, you see this in some parenting and some counseling kinds of modalities where the important thing to do with an emotion is to contact it and amplify it to the point where it expresses as in some kind of release, as tears or laughter or shaking, something like that. You know, or it pours forth as deeply felt story in a way that we can then, either integrate the story or the meaning, this is important sometimes, but also integrate the somatic experience of the state, right? Part of why the strong emotions are destabilizing for us is that their energies either, knock the heart out of its equilibrium into confusion, or we're just not practiced at holding strong energy. And one of the core aspects of practice in working with emotional energies is just to be able to be with them without, falling over in a certain way, to be able to say, this is, this is anger, this is rage, this is fear. And I can feel it kind of pulsing through my body. And the strong emotions are almost always, at least in part, self-protective. And they're not all, there's layers of that. Um, in a certain way, all of our attachment system, in a way, is self-protective, right? The infant trying to figure out the conditions for feeling safety and love and well-being. But in a very simple way, many of the strongest things we call emotions, particularly the anger and fear and freeze type emotions, are nervous system responses to the environment. And they want to keep us safe. And in that sense, there is a very natural uh, impulse to express them. There's a natural impulse to express the mobility emotions, anger and fear, fight and flight, being their active expressions, or the social expressions of like fawning, tending, and befriending as social uh, uh, behavioral ways to restore safety. And then freeze as the immobility response. All of these, in a way, are trying to keep us safe. And so there's value in figuring out how to express them in the right way, right? Energies that are trying to mobilize, there can be deep support in mobilizing them. In the Buddha's system, mostly I think that the uh, the foundational, maybe it's an assumption or the foundational work is that we have to actually be in a safe enough physical and social environment to be able to not have mobilization be our primary healing work. So when we go on retreat, or we become a monastic, or we're in our morning meditation, or we're just bringing ourselves to a relaxed mindfulness in the middle of any part of our day, all of those situations are situations where we are not in immediate physical danger, right? If we're in immediate physical danger, you're not going to close your eyes and drop into your subtle energies. It's appropriate to run, or to engage, or to talk your way out of it, or connect with someone who can help you. Like the 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 Dhamma is not a substitute for self-protective action. It's really how we can process the remnants of, or incomplete layers of, self-protective action once we have restored ourselves in, a modicum of physical and social emotional safety. And so when we come to emotions in practice, there's a foundational assumption that we are safe enough in the moment of practice to be able to turn our attention inward, right? Away from the external world, away from engagement, conversation, relationship. Because to be mindful of an emotion or a feeling requires slowing down with it and sensing the body differently than we do when we're engaged in mobilizing action, right? You can be mindful while you're running, or while you're, lifting weights, or while you're dancing. But in meditation, we want to feel the energies that are subtler than the muscular. Right? So if I'm mobilizing through the musculature, in a way, this is the it's kind of the easiest to sense. It's the grossest level of our uh, energetic layers to sense. And, it's the layer that we first bring to calm or tranquility when we settle in meditation, or we pause in the middle of our day, right? To pause is to stop moving somewhat through the muscular layer. So we come into stillness. We're not using our limbs to do stuff. And we drop in a layer. And that in a layer is often to a layer of the sense of energy as a mobile sensate field through the body. So often people here will describe vibration, tingling, pressure, weight, movement. They'll say, oh, something's rising from the belly up, or there's a kind of pulsing in the chest, or there's a like a weight, like a rock in the chest, or there's a pressing on the back, or or I feel my shoulders pulling in. You'll feel the next layer down from the musculature, everything that's wanting to complete, or the ways that energies are trying to move. And as we continue in mindfulness practice, we get good at, or we train in dropping down through these layers toward both subtler energies and differentiated energies, where I'm not just feeling for subtler and subtler physical energies, but I want to differentiate between let's say the physical sensation part of an energy, like, oh, there's tingling or pressure, and the energetic movement aspect where it's like, oh, and there's a kind of pushing upward, right? Those are different. So I'm going to feel the difference between those. And of course, I want to feel the difference between bodily energies and narrative, right? The story that is spinning through. So when the Buddha describes this kind of practice, he separates it in the foundations of mindfulness into the second, third, and fourth foundations. So the first foundation is all body, right? It's sitting down, mindful of the posture, mindful of breath, mindful of the body as it moves through its various activities. And then three reflective, deconstructive meditations, meditation on the parts of the body and their unsatisfactoriness or unbeautifulness, meditation on the body as composed of the four great elements, the same as everything around us. This moves toward depersonalizing. And then the meditation on the body as a corpse, remembering our mortality. With that as the first foundation, the second, third, and fourth foundations all touch on aspects of feeling and emotion. So the second foundation, mindfulness of Vedana. Again, the word Vedana translates as feeling tone or charge or valence or affect. This is like the base layer of emotion. Vedana is the sense that any given experience, sensory impression, contact, is either pleasant, sukha, unpleasant, dukkha, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, na sukha na dukkha. So pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. And again, this layer, which is similar to what some psychologists will call affect. This is like the foundation upon which the more complex emotions are built. And it's important to get down to this layer. It's actually relatively deep. So often, if you start with the body and you're like, if we're using the metaphor of going down through layers, which works for some and not for others, if we're in that kind of image, it doesn't go directly often from body to Vedana, which is quite subtle sometimes. Often there's like body, and then there's like bigger energies, like I'm grumpy, let's say, and I find that first. Often I'll find narrative first, which is really, maybe it's third foundation or parts of fourth. There is no mindfulness of thoughts, by the way. If you went on retreat in the insight tradition and you were told that the third foundation is mindfulness of thoughts, it's not. But that's a convenient shorthand that we sometimes use because it's important to notice thought. But actually, the Buddha never says notice thought. So we'll get to what he says to notice, what the text says to notice. But the second foundation is notice Vedana. And that's pretty subtle, actually. So any experience is going to be either pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. So what are these middle layers? The third foundation, mindfulness of citta or heart-mind, begins with mindfulness of the presence or absence of the three great poisons. So is there greed or is there an absence of greed? Is there hatred? Is there an absence of hatred? Is there delusion? Is there an absence of delusion? And then it goes into a bunch of other dyads, like am I concentrated or distracted? Am I in an exalted state or not? Things like that, all the way up to am I in a liberated mind state or not? And so the third foundation really it's not thoughts or emotions really, as much as large scale states. The first three are like complex states, emotions, greed, hatred, and delusion. And the rest are really kind of like know where you are on the path, right? It takes a certain kind of mindfulness to look at your level of focus, let's say, and to understand, am I in jhana or not? Am I in a very distracted state or am I relatively settled? And what are you looking at to notice that, right? You're looking at depth of focus, continuity of focus, quality of like clarity of the image, things like that. One of the things that's interesting about the third foundation is that it says, notice the presence and absence of a quality. So if you take the first one, greed, like really wanting something, lust, it's maybe it's relatively easy to notice the presence of greed or lust, especially when it's strong. So become mindful of that. You find yourself in a lusty or greedy or really wanting state. Notice that, right? So that's going to have some of these classic emotional qualities, right? There's going to be a bodily energy, often quite strong, but there's going to be often a mental energy as well. If you're lost in a lust loop, like you're thinking about the object of your desire and you're looping on them, if you want to get out of that, which you may or may not, but if you do, one of the ways to do it is to stop thinking about them, right? And the bodily energy will subside if it's not continually fed. Right? This is why entertainment that encourages greed, like commercials, or entertainment that encourages lust, like pornography, lives on, you know, short, intense bursts of stimulation, right? You have to be continually stimulated to stay in those states, otherwise they decay. So, the commercials get shorter and shorter, the clips in the movies get shorter and shorter, the attention span gets shorter and shorter because for you to stay in a state of greed, right, dissatisfied wanting, where you might spend some money, you have to be maintained in that state. And so that has to be continually re-triggered. And, notice that when you go out for a hike, you're out on the beach or you're deep in the woods or you're backpacking or something and you're away from your devices and the billboards and the screens and the attractive people, whatever it is, after a little while out there, your wanting system is going to settle down. Now, it may flare up and you may get all like, I must go back, to the fountain of pleasures, right? But after some time, and this will happen on retreat, it calms down because it's just not being stimulated. There's nothing to look at. And this is one of the deep, medicines of solitude. And so we're encouraged to become aware of this, emotion or state that's not useful in the path, needs to be seen clearly, greed, lust. But we're also instructed to be aware of its absence. And this is really helpful because it can seem sometimes like mindfulness of emotion is, almost always about noticing when we feel bad. But it's not. It's noticing when you feel bad, noticing when you feel good, and noticing when you feel kind of neutral, which can often be positive. So like you might notice right now, right? We're hanging out, talking Dharma, beautiful quiet evening. There's frogs singing where I am at here. And you might be not in a particularly lusty state, let's say, right? And if that's true for you, notice that, right? And what you could do is you can kind of tune into that particular energy. It's almost like you go looking for that channel on the inner dial. You're like, oh, what's happening on the lust channel? And of course, if you turned to it and you really turned it on, like you started thinking about the thing, you could fire up that channel and then here would come the feeling. If you don't, however, right? If you go sort of looking for that channel a little bit, like, oh, is that channel on right now? It's not. And if you notice that it's not, really tag or memorize that feeling. Right? When you notice that you're not hungry, right? We always notice when we're hungry. Notice when you're not hungry at some point, and notice what that feels like. Right? Notice when you don't feel an urge to buy something. And again, it's yes, notice when you do, right? You're rambling around online or in the shops or wherever, and you feel that uprising urge to buy something. But also notice when that's just absent. Oh, and it could be absent just in a neutral sense, like it's just not there. Or it could be more than absent. There could be the presence of its opposite, like contentment, like active delight in not needing anything right now. And so you want to notice that. And so throughout the third and fourth foundations, then, you get all of these lists, essentially, of things to notice. And many of them are lists, like the hindrances, that are a mix of energetic, emotional, and cognitive material. And now I'm going to start kind of dropping the word emotion and just saying they're a mix um, of inner states, because there's not really a strong dividing line, as you can see, between the kind of physical energies and the cognitive energies. They're completely interwoven. And so as we are practicing, one of the things that we always practice in meditation, right, is coming out of unintentional cognitive activity, so distracting thought, and into whatever I'm choosing to pay attention to, whether that's choosing to rest in a spacious awareness or choosing to focus on some particular thing. But when we bring ourselves to mindfulness of states, like mindfulness of the citta, what we do is we come out of distraction and we come into a sense of the overall state of the heart-mind. What's here? What's the tone in the heart-mind? And you want to understand it. And so what you'll find then, that all of the lists really are just, labels that you can look for, and they're guidelines. If you say, what's going on right now? And you say, oh, there's some doubt. The list of the hindrances is there to both to give you a word, doubt, like watch out for that. And you say, oh, this is doubt, fifth hindrance, all right. And a suggestion to watch out for its unwholesomeness, right? It says, look and see if you can really get it, that when this quality is present, it's not so easy to drop into samadhi. It's not easy to drop into tranquility. Doubt stirs up the citta. Contrary-wise, right, the other list, the wholesome things to develop, is the awakening factors, also in the fourth foundation. So mindfulness itself is wholesome, and then the arousing factors of investigation of Dhammas, energy, and rapture, and then the calming factors of tranquility and concentration or samadhi, immersion, and equanimity. And so if you scan your state, you say, what's here? And you can say, oh, there's actually some equanimity here. You delight in that equanimity. I know it's wholesome, and I can feel for its wholesomeness. And equanimity is fun because, it's not really pleasant. That's its whole jam. It's kind of neutral, but it's wholesome. And wholesome is pleasant. So it actually has a kind of it has a very quiet pleasure, equanimity, right? Like there's been times when, especially now that I have a kid, I'll find myself out in the world somewhere, like in a toy store, let's say, and my kid is full of wanting, so much wanting, it's pouring out of him, it's radiating off his body. I don't want anything in there. And so I'm just kind of wandering around, I'm looking at things, some things are interesting looking, some are not, but I don't have any desire for it, right? I'm relatively equanimous in the toy store. And I can feel that. You just notice it. Say, oh. And I think one of the deep insights that the Buddha had, and we'll finish with this, is that really goes against the stream of our habits, is is that equanimity and the absence of the forceful emotions is generally pleasant, right? You could feel that even the high pleasant emotions, the delights and passions and the beautiful lusts, the appropriate lusts, the celebration, even like awe and wonder, which are wonderful, right? But he understands that because they are context dependent, situation dependent, sensation dependent to the extent that they are, right? That they're not the awe and wonder of resting in the infinite freedom of nibbana. That's sustainable. But if it's the, if it's the awe and wonder of a beautiful sunset, right? Delight fully in it. But if we grasp at it, like it's really important for us to get a good photo of it, and we're like spending the whole time sort of niggling with our phone trying to get it just right. Not as pleasant, not as pleasant. And that even in the pleasure of delighting in it, there can be this little contraction. And an understanding that the heart of equanimity, which is less ruffled, that it's not emotional, again, because emotion isn't the category here, but it's fully wholesome, right? That the unwholesome qualities or the unskillful qualities have really been calmed. We've trained ourselves away from falling into again and again the whole of the unskillful qualities, the doubt, the hatred, the torpor. And what's going to be left are these beautiful qualities: rapture, equanimity, samadhi, tranquility. So our path of being mindful of emotion is not just to label emotions as they come, and not just to become intimate with them, which is healing in itself, but actually to understand them, to tease apart their aspects so deeply that the heart recovers from its ancient habit of needing to be inflamed in order to feel like itself. And instead we find that mysterious emotion of clarity, tranquility, of ease. And from there, our intimacy with the world changes completely. And you can feel that when you're in those states, when you're in that kind of equanimity, when there isn't restlessness, when there isn't torpor, when all of the hindrances have softened. And you can notice, oh, there's an absence of greed, an absence of hatred, an absence of delusion. And you want to just feel the heart in those states and really learn what it's like to be in the world from that place. All right. I'm pausing there. Pleasure.